All right, so we'll be talking about the history of central banking and the enslavement of mankind by Stephen Mitford Goodson. And if you've ever been around 4chan or some other forum like that, you'll probably have heard of this book before. It's quite infamous. It gets recommended a lot. There's a lot of reading guides that recommend this book, and it's grown quite the reputation, to say the least. So I'm going to start off with the author, Stephen Mitford Goodson. He's unfortunately not with us anymore, I believe. He was he worked for the Central Bank of South Africa. He was also politically active, and the reason why he wrote this book was to expose central banking for political purposes. He has political beliefs involving central banking that we will get into. So just keep that in mind, that this book does have political purpose. I believe following his publication of this book, he was fired from the Central Bank of South Africa, and I believe he entered politics full-time after that. The opening, we'll talk about what makes this book so controversial. We begin first with a quote by Ezra Pound, which Ezra Pound, great guy, and it is as follows: "And you will never understand American history or the history of the Occident during the past 2,000 years unless you look at one or two problems, namely, can't say that word, and usury, one or both, one or the other, or both, I should say both." Yeah. So following that, there's also a foreword by, and I'm going to completely butcher this, Prince Manogosu Booth Elenzi. And he was both the prince and also the president of the Inkatha Freedom Party, and he was the prince of the Zulu people. And he writes a foreword of this, for this book. And he talks about his controversy and the contents of the book. And moving on into the contents of the book is, as the title suggests, a history of central banking, beginning with the Roman Empire, I believe that's as far back as it goes, and then it will continue on to the development of fiat currency, the use of gold and commodities to back up currency, and then into the more modern era with the existence of a central bank. I'll read the first paragraph of this book. "History is the most crucial subject of any educational system, superseding science and the humanities in importance. Within its fabric, it holds the culture, traditions, belief, ethos, raison d'être necessary for the continued existence of any people." I probably messed that up. I apologize. "If history is compromised by falsifications and omissions, which are frequently imposed by outsiders, then that civilization will decay and finally collapse, as may be observed in the slow disintegration of Western civilization since 1945. So, from that book, you can probably get a sense about what this book is about. And from the title too, and maybe from some of the people on the cover, this book is a bit. It describes Western civilization as being on the downward trend, especially with the rise of central banking. And what he argues is that central banking, or I guess it's not really an argument, what he shows is that central banking begins primarily in England, and it spreads throughout Europe and into America and into other countries. What makes this book extraordinarily controversial is that a lot of people claim this book is anti-Semitic, and he does talk about Jewish involvement in banking quite a lot, but he also talks about Christian involvement in banking just as much. I don't think it's anti-Semitic to claim that Jewish people work in banking a lot, but maybe to some people it is. I guess I have to educate myself on that. He will also discuss the Rothschild, the House of Rothschild, quite a lot. And if you don't know, Rothschilds, they're a Ashkenazi family that has they found themselves to elevate themselves to the nobility of many different European nations. Today, they run a private equity fund, I believe that's what you would call it. They're quite influential, and there's quite a lot of conspiracy theories around them, given how influential they are and have been. And in researching for this video, I went onto their Wikipedia page, and they have a whole section dedicated to conspiracy theories towards their family. And I find it interesting that in the age of where we openly talk about how billionaires control, have undue influence, and the errors of capitalism, that there seems to be some sort of protection surrounding the Rothschilds, where if you bring up the Rothschilds and their influence, you are labeled as a conspiracy theorist and crazy and anti-Semitic. So that's a bit interesting. I find that a bit interesting. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes to make sure. Right, yeah, so this book not only is a history, it also makes an argument for a form of currency that Mr. Goodson argues in favor of for. And before I read this book, the only really, my understanding of currency was either the fiat currency that we have currently and or the gold standard that America had in the past, in which we issue bonds off of gold reserves, and that the gold reserves that we have keeps our currency. That is what creates the value in our currency. But he argues for a third way, which I believe has a name that I don't quite recall. But essentially, what he argues is that the government itself, not a private central bank, but the government itself issues its own money based off of commodity reserves, not just gold, but could also be oil or something like that. And so that the government itself issuing its own currency to the people will stop the what he finds to be the horrors of the central banking system. And for those of you that don't know, a central bank like that we have in America, or that's currently in England, is a private corporation that the government has some sort of interest in, but doesn't control it, right? So our central bank is called the Federal Reserve. And that name's a bit misleading because it the word federal, it kind of makes it seem that the government owns it, but that's not the case. The government does have some power, but in picking its chairman and such like that. But in the essence, it's a private corporation, so they have their own rules and their own, they decide how they run things. They decide how they issue our own currency. And the Federal Reserve has never been audited, which is funny. And if you have no experience in banking, which when I first read this, I didn't. It's funny, I actually started working in a banking organization. It's actually mentioned in this book when I bought this book. But if you don't know anything about banking, this will give you quite a quick rundown. I don't think this is a good way to learn the academics behind central banking, but it certainly will explain some topics like what a bond is, and how debt works and things to like that. This book is also, I think, would be a good way to learn about other individuals and other people. For instance, he mentions Irving Norton Fisher, who was an economist at Yale, and he proposed issuing bonds off of commodities other than gold. And the book talks about a story in which he was actually, after he proposed that idea, he was in front of the Yale some sort of board, and they were like scolding him for having such a ridiculous idea. And this guy was like a long-standing professor at Yale of economics and renowned. You can Google him, Irving Norton Fisher. So he's written some books that I probably will be checking out in the future, ideally in the future. What else? Oh yeah, this is a very fast read. I read this book in probably like a week and a half. It reads very fast. It's nice. It keeps you on edge. It's very good. The story it tells you, it's full of a lot of little stories that maybe you heard of, but you're gonna hear them from a different angle, or maybe stories that you haven't heard of, and you'll be like, wow, that's really interesting. And I'm not gonna say that everything in this book is 100% true. I haven't checked everything, but from the things I have checked, they are true, but as always, do your own research. I will say he doesn't source everything correctly. Sometimes he'll go whole pages without sourcing something. And I believe it's like a source from like a page ago. And, that's not the proper way to do it, but I understand, But not to say I don't believe any of these things are true. One of the things that I noticed in this book that's pretty interesting is that everyone, a lot of people throughout history who we are supposed to hate, they just so happen to oppose the central bank system. And, it's funny that all these evil people just so happen to oppose this system. So that's a good thing. He talks about Gaddafi a lot, or for a little bit in the book. And the author, he's very fond of Gaddafi. And Gaddafi, he issued bonds off of oil reserves. And to put it in Zoomer speak, that gave the Federal Reserve the ick. But yeah, this is a great book. I highly recommend reading it. It lives up to the hype. I definitely think that it will make you consider things that you haven't before, and maybe it'll get you interested in banking and understanding the economy like it did with me. Moving on to a documentary called American Freedom to Fascism. This documentary was made by Aaron Russo in 2006. And I think the reason why I'm talking about it in this book review is that I think a lot of people would also find this documentary interesting if you find this book interesting. And this documentary, American Freedom to Fascism, can be found on archives.com. You don't even have to download anything. Just Google American Freedom to Fascism archives and you'll find it there for free for watching. I will say this documentary talks about a lot of different things that the director or writer creator Aaron Russo finds to be the government overstepping their bounds and curtailing the American populace's freedom. And in that, he'll talk about the IRS, the creation or our currency in general, income tax especially. He'll talk about stuff like that. I think he also talks about like ID requirements and things of that nature. The documentary is very in your face, very polarizing. There is a lot of I wouldn't say a lot, but there certainly is some misinformation. There's some quotes attributed to people that are taken out of context, that type of thing. It's funny, if you go on the Wikipedia page, there's a whole section about all the misinformation, and it will talk about the quotes. It will be like, in the movie there's this quote, but in the wider context it means something different. But I'll leave you to read them yourself. If you actually read the misinfo, the debunking on the Wikipedia page, I don't think it debunks anything. At least it's interesting. I recommend you go check it out, what they're talking about. But what's interesting, and the main thing I wanted to bring that up is the use of our federal income tax to pay off debt that is issued from the Federal Reserve. So how our currency system works in America is that the Federal Reserve issues money in exchange for the American country taking on debt, right? It's a bank, and they're taking on loans. And the way that the loans are paid back, this debt that we have, the trillions and trillions of dollars of debt that we have, that we use to finance wars and all sorts of things, it currently comes, the way we pay it back is currently through 14% of our total income tax that the country pays every year. And this documentary argues that federal income tax is actually unconstitutional. From my law background, it's an interesting argument, I will say. But we won't get into that much anyway. But if you are interested in this book, you'll probably be interested in the documentary as well. I don't believe it's very long, probably like an hour, 30 minutes maybe. Definitely polarizing. Definitely, do your own research while engaging in this stuff, as always. One last thing that I want to say, talking about unpopular historical individuals, and people who oppose the financial system oftentimes end up dying in interesting ways, or are the subject of warfare. I will say the best thing about the central bank is that the central banking system is that if you ever need to fight a war, especially if that war is against a nation that doesn't have a central bank, you're going to win, because the central bank is just going to print as much money as you need. They're just going to give you as much loans to increase your warfare power as much as possible, to the point where you're just going to overpower them. So that's definitely something you'll see throughout the history, a lot of that happening. But I'm rambling too much now. Thanks for watching. I highly recommend this book. Check it out. That is A History of the Central Banking and the Enslavement of Mankind by Stephen Mitford Goodson. Thank you.